Many people believe that you have to run around in the physical doing stuff in order to affect things on the spirit. It's not like that. It's actually the inverse. The higher vibrating order of things is the thing that dictates the lower vibrating order of things, which is density or form. So if you're working at the level of frequency, right, which is the quantum, and you release distortion patterns at that level, then what happens is your life, your physical life, will reorganize to that higher level order of vibration.
Welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I am your humble servant and seafood Taoist Master San Qing. And what an amazing day it is today. I want to welcome to the podcast Karen Cheong. And I also want to reveal the secrets of and the wisdom teachings of the universe of how to access what we would call spiritual consciousness at an unobtainable level to the very mundane sort of mental state. But we aren't talking about that now, are we? We are talking about one is all is one, an incredible teacher and practitioner of quantum touch. Excusing that. And I just want to thank you for coming to the podcast, my dear friend.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So why don't we dive into a little bit of an abbreviated backstory of how you got to this point?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. And the reason I looked sort of sideways, I was like, how long of a story? You said abbreviated, right?
You can give me the details. I'm not on a time restraint.
I'm the one on the time restraint. Okay. All right. Fantastic. So what started my spiritual seeking was a health crisis. And I found that a lot of people, when they start on their spiritual journey, start with some kind of crisis, whether it be, a health crisis, a relationship crisis, a death, a financial crisis, something, right? That's typically how we begin. Not all of us, but many of us start that way. And for me, it was a health crisis way back in my 20s. Mm-hmm. And if you've ever had like a mosquito bite on like your knuckle or in the back of your knee, and you know how it can drive you kind of nuts, well, I had that from like underneath my chin all the way down to my ankles. And I was living in New York City at the time and going to see, a lot of different practitioners because I was trying to make it go away, right? So I would see acupuncturists, and I tried the traditional sort of Western approach to it, and nothing was really working. And then, as the universe would have it, right where I was getting to the point where I couldn't tolerate it anymore because I wasn't sleeping. I was just scratching all night, and then I'd wake up with my skin oozing and my clothes would stick to me. Because I was losing it emotionally at this point, I had been not sleeping for a long period of time, and just the emotional duress of not feeling good at all, and just being scratchy all the time. I was really getting to my rope's end, and I was in a very dark place where I was actually contemplating suicide because I just didn't think I could sustain it anymore. And at that point, my husband, Chris, intervened, and he said, okay, I feel like you're right at the threshold of something really horrible. So what we're going to do is we're going to send you all the way across from New York City to this place in Canada, across the prairies, like 5 hours flight away, to this acupuncturist that your aunt went to, who helped her when no other acupuncturist could because she survived her cancer. So even though I kind of fought him a little bit on it, he was like, no, you're going. So off I went. And within 5 weeks of seeing this man, and I just want to back up a little bit. So when I first met him, all right, it was my first encounter with a being who was looking at me, but he wasn't looking at me physically. I could tell. I was like, it was like he was scanning me or something. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And he said, well, I know exactly what's happening with you. And you also have a headache on the lower left side of your brain. And you also have slight stomach distress. So don't worry. We'll take care of all that. I was like, who is this dude? You know what I mean? So anyhow, 5 weeks later, I ended up looking pretty much like I do now, like very healthy, vital, just a totally different version of who I was when I first walked in his door. And that catalyzed my seeking, because my question at the end of that was, what is there in the unseen that dictates what we think of as our physical reality? What is there? Because, I mean, yeah, he put in some needles and he put some cups on, but like everything changed. So fast forward 25 years around-ish, right, of seeking different things, experimenting with different energetic modalities, going deep into personal development. So it's kind of like the spectrum of what's available to us. And just being the way I am and of Chinese descent, I'm pretty intense in terms of implementation. So I'm like, well, if I paid to learn the thing, let's implement the thing and see if it works, because I just paid for it, right? So anyhow, that happened. And I noticed that in our real estate practice, so Chris, my husband Chris, and I had a real estate practice in San Francisco. And on the external, from the external viewpoint, it looked amazing, right? So here we are, top producers in the city, doing well really financially. Our clients are lovely, 90% referral rate, and we only worked with nice people. So chances are we were working with nice people. And something was really wrong, because I found that, first of all, I always felt like I didn't have enough. So I'd spreadsheet every night to see how long it would take before we burned through our savings and had to sell our house and move in with my parents. So that was the first thing. It didn't matter how much there was in the bank. And I'm like, okay, this is like not normal behavior. And secondly, I noticed that in terms of our peers, even though we were doing really well, that a lot of our peers at the level that we were working at were doing much less for their clients, cared a lot less about their clients, and still were outproducing us. And I was like, okay, well, what's happening here? So I came back from a journey to France, and I was on my acupuncturist's table, and she said to me, have you ever heard of frequency work? And it was kind of like, I don't know if you remember this scene from The Matrix. You know when Keanu Reeves is like going backwards and the bullets are flying by him in like really slow motion? Okay. Well, that was like my very sort of mundane version of that, because time got really, really slow. And I can remember like every degree of my turn as I turned around to look at her. And I said to her, I don't know what that is, but I know that I need to. And so that's when I learned about frequency work, or this kind of work at the level of the quantum, where I was releasing my distortion patterns. And I did that intensively for 2 years, just because I just wanted to feel better. I wasn't seeking abilities, all right? So let me just put that firmly out there. I wasn't one of those people who are like, I really want to be able to do something special. I was like, I just want to feel like not crappy and not like I'm chasing money all the time. So that happened sort of really subtly and quickly when my husband was like, oh, have you noticed that you haven't been spreadsheeting? I'm like, no, I did not. That's amazing. And then 2 years later, I happened to be at a retreat in Sedona, and that I actually decided to not attend, another very non-Chinese thing to do, because I had cleared my calendar for 12 days then. So if you own a small business, you know what it's like to not be around for 12 days. So I cleared my calendar for 12 days, delegated to everybody, pay to go to this retreat. I walk into the retreat, and I'm like, whoa, this field is unstable. Like, I shouldn't be here. So I decided to not go to the retreat. So all my Chinese grandmothers and great-grandmothers were like, psh, like, what are you doing, girl? Right? So anyway, I skip the retreat. I do my own meditation. And it's weird because I didn't plan this. But when I entered meditation, I just thought, okay, I'm just going to intend to pierce the veil of the absolute, which was the purpose of this retreat. I'm just going to do it on my own. I don't know why I thought I could do that, but I just did. So I was raising my frequency resonance, and I pierced the veil of forgetting. And when I did that, I merged back into the oneness and lost the memory of Karen. So meaning Karen didn't exist, the idea or identity of Karen. And then I recognized that, first of all, everything was frequencies. And then I started laughing because I couldn't believe that I'd forgotten that I was part of the oneness. Like, I was like, how do you forget that? It's like forgetting that you have a hand. And then I started crying because I couldn't believe that I'd forgotten that I was part of the oneness. And after I came back from that meditation where I perceived everything as frequencies, and I had the profound realization that we actually can make shift at the frequency level. When I came back into my awareness of my body and my little Airbnb, I could still perceive that way. I was like, I wasn't expecting to. And that's when my abilities came in and everything changed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Amen to that. Booyah. Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, as you probably know, with my background, I'm a Taoist priest and a couple of lineages of Taoism. And, you know, that's really the core essence. And the seeker's path of knowing is the highest level of ascension is direct source channeling. And this goes back thousands of years. A lot of people tend to miss the deeper nature of it, you know. But everything is frequential. Everything is, you know, a form of distortion until otherwise noted. If we were to describe it from a Taoist path, it's a light to wave to matter to particle realized with your attention, intention, cutting from the cloth of perfection, the mother, a distortion, as my dear friend, the Buddhist monk would say, the dukkha. And this creates what we consider a distorted state within the electromagnetism, which is your perception of reality. So you now have what we call energy. Energy is a state that has a vibration. The vibration has a frequency. The frequency, if met with resonance, oh, yes, it will be yours. Oh, yes, it will. So I'm picking up what you're putting down, my dear friend. I love the fact that it's so succinct and to the point. And, you know, you were very much a seeker, a finder, still a teacher, still a student. I mean, that's how you evolve and expand. I mean, that's really the essence of Taoism, is observing reality as a bellows. Everything is contracting and expanding at the same time. You're all things and nothing at the same time. And your mission, if you choose to accept it, Ethan Hawke, is to find the center point, to find the Vesica, the unified state, not the electromagnetism. This is how you maestro it. You become the imperium, the maestro to play with. So how is it that you acquire this frequential state that materializes something more than the mundane within this reality? We're talking about superhuman mental, emotional, physical healings. That's the kind of stuff that gets me all warm and fuzzy inside.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say it really simply and then probably get into it, but it's to raise your frequency resonance. So the thing is, as you mentioned, this is beyond the mind. This is far beyond the mind in terms of the vibrational level of it, right? We're talking about at the level of the quantum, of the frequency. This is what, you know, I think, and I don't know much about Taoism, so please excuse me, right? The way, the action in inaction, it has nothing to do with your physical activity. It has to do with the expansion of your consciousness. So to me, we're saying the same thing, but actually in very different ways, actually. But it's funny how these things are. You know, with spirituality, I found that there are many ways to describe it, and many paths to the same thing, but ultimately it is the same thing. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. But to answer your question, how do you raise your frequency resonance? I mean, it sounds like a lovely idea. It's batted around a lot on social media as if it's really easy. And I think that the challenge that people are having with raising your frequency resonance is to take some work. You have to be aware that you're running distortion patterns, first of all, and then you have to release them. And the thing is, to me, distortion patterns happen exactly at the level that you mentioned, which is at the level of the field, the quantum, right? So everyone believes, or not everyone, that's an overstatement. Many people believe that you have to run around in the physical doing stuff in order to affect things on the spirit. It's not like that. It's actually the inverse. The higher vibrating order of things is the thing that dictates the lower vibrating order of things, which is density or form. So if you're working at the level of frequency, right, which is the quantum, and you release distortion patterns at that level, then what happens is your life, your physical life, will reorganize to that higher level order of vibration. So I still haven't answered your question as to how. If I were listening, I'd be like, that's nice. How do I do that? Right? I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, what's the secret sauce?
Where's the secret sauce? Stop holding out. So the wonderful thing about this time that many people have been, like many traditions have been talking about this time, where consciousness is rising. And it can look like consciousness is not rising because it looks like the world is going to hell in a handbasket. But that's just part of the illusion, to help to shake you awake into what is really true beyond the illusion. So the how still is kind of an amazing thing, because we as humans feel like life has to be really hard and really difficult, and we often have to suffer in order to get to something good. All right, I'm not suggesting that there's no work, but at this level, at this time, we are at a time when consciousness is rising, and someone like me has had an experience at the level of the field and is like, whoa, I have this remembering of all of this stuff is frequency, and I can change things at this level. And the cool thing is that we all can, we just have forgotten. And those of us who want to rise in our consciousness, because it's an act of free will, not everyone has to do it, can do so and then have the same remembering. I'm not particularly special. I'm just a little bit faster, right, in terms of my path. So the thing is, when you do things like listening to what I call a group frequency calibration, which is basically will sound like a guided meditation to those listening to it, I'm working at the level of the quantum with the mastermind to release the distortion patterns that we're working on in that particular group frequency calibration, and also to clarify our connection to source, the oneness, the one, the divine, whatever you want to call that very highly resonating consciousness from which everything comes and to which everything returns. So when you're doing that, it's insane how fast your life can change because you're clearing your distortions at the level of the field. Now, it's funny, San, because some people will say to me, well, I don't feel anything necessarily when you're doing it, but I understand after that something significant has happened. That was my experience too. I actually didn't have an experience. And but I just had this knowingness that everything had changed. That's okay because it's happening at the level of the quantum. So it's beyond your ability to sense with your physicalness. Now, that said, some people sense a lot. You know, some people shake. Some people feel their chi or their energy like shooting up their spine. Some people feel really, really hot. Some people see colors. Some people journey. I mean, like all kinds of things can happen. And some people feel absolutely nothing. And I say this only because we feel like there's supposed to be an archetype of what awakening looks like. There is no archetype. There's your journey. You know what I mean? Like everyone thinks like, I'm supposed to have this path. You have what you have, you know? And so your response to it will be yours. And as you do the third step, so the 3 steps, just in case I didn't recap. 1, be aware that you're running distortion patterns, just as you so beautifully said at the beginning. 2, to realize that not only are they coloring your entire experience, but that you can start to shift them by doing something like listening to a group frequency calibration. 3, there's something that I call confirming the removal of the pattern, which has to do with you and your free will. I have noticed in my 25 plus years of seeking that in the spiritual community, there's a very huge trend of like, the guru will save me. You know, they're going to like wave their magic wand over you or sprinkle some holy water on you or something, and then you'll be saved, right? There's not, for you, it's like you're not enough to like help yourself. Well, it is now time in consciousness that we take accountability for our free will and actually, if we choose to, rise in our resonance. So when I remove the distortion at the level of the field, it's gone. Instantly. Now, you, though, have something called free will, which is a really incredibly important thing. Because on the one hand, it can be used in a way that's really helpful to you. And on the other, we make really stupid choices sometimes as humans, right? We're fallible. We're human. Like, that happens. So anyway, when you recognize that you're co-creating everything, whether unconsciously or consciously, you recognize that, okay, I have authority over my physical, mental, emotional experience. I need to now release this or confirm the removal that's happened at the level of the field that Karen has helped me with. But this is my journey. I have to also be like, nope, that's not part of my reality anymore because you are co-creating your reality. So I give you this like tremendous boost, but it's for you to carry through with it. And so the fascinating thing about this time and about this work is it's about empowerment. Like I'm not going to wave my like special little wand over you. I'm going to give you a huge boost if you want it, but you have to like take it and run, you know what I mean, with it? So yeah, that was probably a longer answer than you wanted. To your question that you asked like 5 minutes ago now.
Booyah on that one, double booyah. Woo! So this is very interesting. So you mentioned the master. Who's the master?
I'm sorry, the master?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
You mentioned the master a while back, even though it maybe didn't come up in the very, very powerful wisdom teaching that you might have consciously not heard it, but you mentioned the master. And so I was like, okay, who is the master?
I see. The very first, the man who helped me with my acupuncture back in the day. Yeah, okay. His name is Dr. Stephen Ong. He's in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.
This was part of when you were just giving me a description of this quantum change. You mentioned the
Yeah.
master. So is he a part of this collective?
Oh, I see. Yeah, so there was somebody that I learned, I did my own clearing with in terms of frequency work, and then did my very specific path. And I went to that retreat with somebody else that I never actually learned from, even though I was called to the retreat because I was there to do my own work. Is that who you're referring to,
Well,
perhaps?
it was just part of your answer that was in it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I want to know who the master is.
Oh,
Because it was part of you're describing the whole experience of how you acquire the frequency and everything else, and you mentioned the master, and I was like, "Oh,
oh,
who's the master?"
yeah. Yeah, so I don't know if I would call him I don't know that I said master. I have had a number of guides along the way, because I feel like we become our own masters. It's really about our own authority and our own learning and our own being accountable to rise in our frequency resonance. Because, I've noticed, Anne, that not everyone picks up a tool when you give it to them. So they really want to have the thing that they want to have, the experience that they want to have, the awakening, the whatever it is that they want to have.
Mm-hmm.
But yet not everyone is willing to do the work. So the thing about frequency work and the work that I do has to do with taking accountability and knowing that you have the authority to do this. And I did mention that the most important relationship of all is, of course, that with Source. Right, with pure source, because when you actually clarify that relationship, which is what we're here for, that is when you start to have that awakened experience, because you recognize that you are part of the oneness, right? That is the thing. It's not about, to me, like I said, I've been seeking a long time. But when I merged with the oneness, I stopped seeking because it didn't matter to me anymore because I was complete and full. I'm not saying that I was necessarily like the end all be all, but I recognized that I had this completeness that I didn't need to seek anymore, because my seeking was because I felt like I wasn't enough. I didn't know enough. I wasn't enough in order to be able to access the mysteries of the universe. But once I clarified my relationship with what I call the one or pure source, that is the relationship. That is the most important relationship that we can have, because as you said, it's about that direct, very unique, very intimate relationship that informs what it is that you have access to in terms of what you know, what you can tune into, what your intuition is, what your experience is like, who you get to meet. All that stuff is informed by the clarity of your relationship with the one, which is reflected in your vibrational rate or your frequency resonance.
That's big. So this is sort of for a Taoist seeker, which seems to
Mm-hmm.
be boohooed these days, the seeker title, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm bringing back the big good old fashioned pink. I'm bringing back ritual. I'm bringing back ancient practice. I'm bringing back religion.
Mm-hmm.
People just don't like it. They're just like, hang on a second. You have to have a seed of something that creates what we call inquiry, and the inquiry turns into curiosity. The curiosity becomes a contemplation that then arises in hope, and that hope develops a belief system. That belief system then creates a knowing. So to solidify that knowing, I always remind people, if you're thinking, you are not knowing. If you're knowing, you are feeling. So this is
Mm-hmm.
very interesting, because
Yeah.
you mentioned that that's not necessarily how people experience it, yet they had said result. The most important thing is I'm a fan of the 80s. I'm a pop culture freak, so I stay in that decade. So I take the Pepsi challenge with anybody. That chill you're getting up your spine right now is, I get down with the get down. I'll do the taste test with anyone. I want to show me what we're talking about. And this is where
Yeah.
people get a little bit confused, because evidence or self-realization comes with repeatable experiential moments that are
Mm-hmm.
validated by the seeker, that turns into
Mm-hmm.
the knower. I mean, I would actually parallel Taoism to a Gnostic path of self-realization, know thyself.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get deeper with the nature of that, which we call the primordial mother, this is
Mm-hmm.
a unification of all things. And then you reveal, and you did mention briefly, once you hit that center point within Taoism, it's called the Wu Ji.
Mm-hmm.
That's the primordial mother. That's between the breath in and the breath out, revealing
Mm-hmm.
what you mentioned, which is called Wu Wei, which
Mm-hmm.
is effortless action, effortless effort. all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden everything is synchronistic, serendipitous.
Mm-hmm.
All things are now, you are imperium of this state. That
Mm-hmm.
means that you are the maestro. It's
Mm-hmm.
what we call, we cross over from a point of no return, where
Mm-hmm.
you detach and then attach as the primordial mother. That means that the transmutation of that state means that you can be angry, sad, happy, in love, in lust. You can have the most incredibly obscurely distorted viewpoint, but you're able to transmit unification. And this is
Mm-hmm.
an internal mastery within Qigong. So I think if you were looking at a quantum level, if you mentioned physics in of itself, we would
Mm-hmm.
talk about being accessible to the now moment. There is
Mm-hmm.
nothing else. This is the
I,
state
I would
which you would
agree.
call 0 point, a scalar wave, universal consciousness, however you put it,
Mm-hmm.
revealing itself that way. What
Yeah,
do you think about that?
I would agree with you. So we're talking the same thing, but different terms. So what you call the universal mother, to me, is when you move from the little s self of the ego mind to what I call the big S self, the aspect of you that is infinite, indestructible consciousness, aware that it is intrinsically part of the one, aware that it is co-creating everything, because that's the mother, right? Co-creator of everything. So we all have this aspect within us. Oftentimes we can think that, okay, well, I don't know what she's talking about. That sounds really great. But the thing is, when you start to raise your frequency resonance by releasing your distortion patterns, you start to become aware of your big S self, that part of you that is infinite, indestructible consciousness. Now, for those of you who think you've never experienced it, this is not a mental thing. It's not a mental phenomenon, because the vibrational level of the big S self is far beyond the mind. So the thing about the big S self is kind of like if you were ever like I don't know, out camping or something like this, and you look at a beautiful mountaintop range, or you look at an expanse of a starlit sky, and you feel very, very small, and you kind of have this amazing feeling of awe that we can have as humans, and this experience of the heart opening, and feeling this like immense gratitude for life. As you start to enter that vibrational level, you start to experience what I call the big S self. So the thing is about spiritual awakening, if you are thinking, you are not in that state. You have to raise your resonance above the level of the mind. The mind is very seductive. It will tell you all kinds of things. It'll tell you all kinds of theorems and stories and et cetera, et cetera. It's very good at it. That's its job. But the thing is, true awakening isn't a story. It's an experience, and it's a visceral experience that will be yours. And the thing is about awakening that I find funny in terms of what we talk, how we talk about it in our culture, is it's as if the spiritual awakening is the end point. It's like, well, when I get to spiritual awakening, bing, I'll be done, sorted, check. You know what I mean? Like, that's how we think of spiritual awakening. To me, it's the beginning, right? It's the threshold which you go through in order to start to experience more of the infinite. Spiritual awakening is infinite. It is not an end point. It's a beginning point into all the higher dimensional orders. And as you said about time, so the thing is, you know, there's all this stuff like, you know, kind of new agey stuff like be here now, you know, all that sort of stuff. So why do we care? Why is that so important? And then you mentioned the 0 point. So from my perspective, your consciousness being projected through the crosshairs of time and space, okay, that is how you have an embodied experience. So the thing is, when you get into the present moment of linear time, and you raise your vibrational level enough, you can start to experience what I call the eternal now. And I'm sure you have another word for that. But the eternal now is really that resonance of time where everything on spirit or the quantum level happens. That's where everything's happening all at once. Linear time is a human construct. It's what your mind needs to do in order to understand everything all at once. I mean, do you think we can barely understand infinite with our brains. I mean, I'm not saying that our brains aren't magnificent, but they're quite limited, and they can only process at a certain speed. But as consciousness, you can actually be aware of all that happening all at once. So linear time is like a compression of the eternal now, so that you and I can talk about it in something called language, which is quite slow, but it allows us, in terms of our brains, to understand past, present, future. When you access the 0 point of space and time, you have to be right in the present moment of linear time, and right-centered in your body. You have to be in your body in order to do it. So the amazing thing is when you're in this, let's call it crosshairs, present moment linear time, and centered in the body, that is when you're most in alignment with how your consciousness is being projected into the physical embodiment. So that's when you're most in alignment with life, where you feel most centered, more grounded, more open, more receptive, more in flow, more in your ability to co-create your reality. It's where inspired productivity comes in, or collaboration. All that stuff happens when you're in this 0 point. So as you mentioned, the present moment is extraordinarily important in order to access the limitlessness of the eternal now. Because, this whole illusion of scarcity, of time, of just scarcity, period, exists because we feel disconnected and finite. We have forgotten who we truly are in terms of your big S self, this aspect of you that is infinite and indestructible consciousness. Now, the thing about this time that's amazing, to me anyway, is we get to have that experience of consciousness, but in the embodiment, in the messiness of the human, of the imperfection, as you said, the lust, the love, the whatever, you're having a human experience of whatever you're having and those intense emotions that we think are very real and all that stuff. You're meant to have that because it's such a rare thing. I mean, if you think about it, the physicists have been saying that 99.9999999% of everything is quote unquote nothing. It's not nothing, it's just not form. So the fact that you get to experience form, there's a 0.0000001%, that is the gift. So it's like in a lot of traditions, they negate the physical, like, oh, it's terrible, you're trying to exceed it. It's not about negating the physical. It's about having a higher level perspective so you can embrace the physical and recognize this is part of the path that I wanted to have, the journey I wanted to experience, and have this union happen between the spirit and the physical, which I think is an incredible opportunity.
Yeah, I believe we just said the same thing.
Yes, I believe so.
That's the vesica, that's the center point, the primordial mother. So unification, I've spent about 32 years consciously as a Taoist, and my fast forward express version of that was quite something else. It was pretty alarming for most, but it all happened within 7 days. So going
That's awesome.
from never ever experiencing whatever spiritual whatever, it was nothing more than I was a bodybuilder and power lifter from my teenage years. At 19, a voice in my head told me to meditate. Never meditated before in my life. I entered a meditation class and created silence for about 20 minutes, and I shit myself. I went, wow, this is what power is. Forget about picking up and lifting stuff.
Yeah.
Progression went from that to channeling my teacher Latsu that I still commune with to this day, second, which is really a dialogue of the monologue, right? Which is what we call the facet of the diamond of perfection. I have a dialogue with my teacher that gives me the monologue with the primordial mother. Direct source, Akashic records, holds mente, however you want to perceive it, it all comes down with the accessibility. And furthermore, I went from that to, distant healing. And finally, on the 4th day, I witnessed physical flesh, gangrenous in color, turn back to pink within 40 minutes. Now that is the beginning of what is a normal serendipitous day of realization, because when you transmute flesh, it will wiggle before your very eyes. You will see a transmutation where if it's a gash, I've seen bones heal. Gash, I used to have a complete obsession with popping sebaceous cysts under people's skin, raising it to the top and exploding them. It was a fascination of mine. And so tumors, things of that nature is now. It's not, and when I'm in that state, I've been measuring my brain waves for many, many years, and I always hit anywhere between 100 to 400 hertz. None of this Stephen Hawking's scale of consciousness nonsense. I'm sorry. Rest in peace, my friend. The bottom line is you cannot deny it. I'm no place, I'm no person, I'm no thing. You are just now. And I think the construed, distorted version of that is, what do you say to the I am? Because I cannot handle the I am. Because I am is indicating that you are separate, instead of
Mm-hmm.
realizing you're not asking yourself. When someone calls me up and says grandma's in a coma and the doctor says she's going to die in 24 hours, I said, no, she's not. And they're like, how do you, oh my goodness, you're that guy that everyone gives me their number. And the next day she wakes up from a coma and she's 100% solid, her vitals are regulated. These are the paranormal, supernatural, what I call supernormal experiences that validate this. Now, I had no choice when I started my journey. I had to go into understanding. I was immersed in Chinese culture. It was my thing from a young boy, and it just grew into my pursuit and going to China and becoming ordained and all that kind of great stuff. But it
Mm-hmm.
was my deep understanding of thousands of lives before this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it enters into a whole new level when you know who you are. And
Mm-hmm.
this is what I really appreciate about your story is your knowing is not in question. It's the now moment. And people speak on this a lot, but it's like, okay, show me. You know what I mean? It's
Mm-hmm.
like these types of things. It's like, what evidence validates what is it being experienced by said evidence from the seeker to the knower, that isn't just a transitory psychological sort of like state of distortion, which
Mm-hmm.
is where the material needs to be altered. This is where people get obsessed with Taoist alchemy. And I love people teaching. There's only 3 people in my lifetime I've ever seen levitate, right? 2 of them were deep in the jungles of Indonesia, that were Kundalini masters. And,
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed hanging out with them. The third one was one of my students.
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, well, if he's your student and he does it, why don't you do it? Because I couldn't give a rat's ass about levitating. I'll teach you.
Exactly.
It's
Mm-hmm.
it's about how far you want to come with that alchemical process. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
find this interesting because when you get watered down alchemy, in
Mm-hmm.
essence, it means your connection with, say, God, I call it Tao, and the dark arts. And then people go, whoa, whoa, the dark arts, that's scary. That
Mm-hmm.
sounds ominous. Well, no, because the primordial mother is the pure essence of the void.
Mm-hmm.
This is where you see
Mm-hmm.
this reflected sort of state of what we call the concentration of the diamond, which is the seed of the yang within the primordial womb. And
Mm-hmm.
over a cycle of 9, you go from conception to creation of life. And
Mm-hmm.
that in itself is a miracle. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where we head into the numerology. As
Mm-hmm.
is said, the highest level of ascension for any Taoist is 9. And people are like, well, what does that even mean? It's the highest number. And then furthermore, it can either be 1 or 0.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you could take any polymath and he will get down with the get down, whether it may come in the form of geometry or mathematics. You'll
Mm-hmm.
understand what that means, in not just conceptually, but viscerally, as you put. Viscerally, kinesthetic, and somatic responses is where I found it very interesting, because you mentioned the visceral experience, yet
Mm-hmm.
you also mentioned that you don't feel anything at a certain level. I
Mm-hmm.
I I always I welcome a healthy conversation about this, because once you access what we call the substance,
Mm-hmm.
it is extremely tangible. It is not in question the abilities, and it doesn't matter what level you ascend to. This is
Mm-hmm.
furthermore the journey of the knower, is that
Mm-hmm.
you are now all the time, that you are present to alter at will with your
Mm-hmm.
attention, intention, anything
Mm-hmm.
and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's what happens when you start to, like I said, recognize that you're co-creating your reality. And the funny thing is, I would have said that I was a seer. Before my abilities came in, that's how I perceived the non-ordinary. So I would see
Mhm.
things, colors, shapes, beings, whatever. Like I would see stuff. And I had a pretty in-depth relationship with that, let's call it, ability. But then as I was clearing my own distortion, I actually had to release my attachment to my seeing, because I just used it all the time, right? Like I was kind of like attached to it, right? I was like, oh, that's like my sixth sense, right? I already, with my feelings sort of seeing sense. I call it seeing, but it's more like I call it feeling, like seeing and feeling at the same time. I could see what the probabilities were. I could tell when people were saying things that they were not congruent with. I could sense a whole bunch of things. So I lost it for a period of time. I'm not saying this is everyone's path. I'm saying this is mine. So when I released my distortions, I went through this period where it disappeared for about, I don't know, like a few months, like 8 to 10 months. It just was not there. And it was really disorienting for me because I'd been so reliant on it without really realizing that it was. And at some point, I detached from having that ability or that sense. And as my resonance rose, right when I pierced the veil of forgetting and I came back, I just knew. And I cannot tell you how I know. I just know. Without like a shadow of a doubt, I don't think, I just know it. Wholly, completely pure packet of information. So sometimes I'll have the experience of seeing. Oftentimes, though, it is more just a knowing and or a feeling sense, depending on what it is and what it is that I'm tapping into, what dimensional order it is, et cetera, what's happening with the person. So sometimes I'll have, depending on, like I said, what I'm tapping into, if it's a higher dimensional order, it's really beautiful to me. And so it feels really beautiful, you know what I mean? Because it's such an expansive space and it's very, very high in frequency resonance. And, I'll see that sort of thing mirrored in what we experience on the physical. So as you said, like, you can it's funny because, yes, of course, you can change anything around you if you understand that you're co-creating your reality and you're vibrating high enough. And it is a fascinating thing to be able to do. We just took a group of almost 50 people to Scotland this past year on a spiritual retreat. And it had been raining there for almost a year straight. And one of our friends who we met, who lives near the borders of Scotland, like right above England, he had been wanting to repair half of his roof because he'd gotten half of it like redone and it was still leaking on the other half. So he was waiting to get the other half of his roof done. And it had been a year and his roofer had said to him, I need 5 dry days in order to complete this. It doesn't have to be sunny, just dry. And it had been over a year and those 5 days had not yet obtained. So he still had this roof that was leaking and it had been like the wettest summer ever. So here we are, and I had this knowing. I'm like, I'm not sure why, because it's not like revealed to me like in detail before it happens. It just happens, and then more is revealed. So anyhow, here we are in the Valley of Glencoe, which is a spectacular valley, and we and it's usually foggy and socked in and raining. And like I said, it's been raining for a whole year. And when we arrived in Scotland, it was raining. But as we started to approach that morning, I was what I call quantum manifesting sun. I was like, we can just have sun here. It's going to be no problem because, it's cold, it's wet, it's 50 people standing outside with speaker equipment. We'd all prefer it to not be rained on. Let's just, have not rain. And so it actually ended up being this glorious sunny weather with not a cloud in the sky. And as we progressed, it happened like in every place. And it was funny because the rest of the weather in Scotland was raining. And everywhere we went, it was sunny. It was really wonderful. So it's like things like this that we don't think that we can co-create or manifest, especially when we're in service to the highest level or order of vibration, that you recognize, as you said, you can manifest anything because you're co-creating everything. And once you recognize that, that's when scarcity drops away. Because, really, scarcity happens because of the veil of forgetting. You've forgotten that you are intrinsically connected to the oneness and that you are co-creating everything. If you could co-create infinitely, do you think you'd really experience scarcity? No, of course you wouldn't, because you would know that you could co-create infinitely. So that's the wonderful thing about frequency work and all these different kinds of modalities that are helping people to raise their vibration. That's the thing. It's to come back to the remembering of who you truly are. And it's all about raising your vibrational level and releasing your distortion patterns, whatever your methodology is. And I think it's really wonderful that there are so many different people offering different things to raise your resonance so that you can have this remembering. And it's interesting that you talk about the primordial mother and the void, because so few people talk about the void. And the void, to me, this is just my perspective, having experienced it, is the place of absolute dissolution and absolute potential. It is where all form comes from. It is completely feminine in its nature. And so the thing is that most people don't understand about the void is that it exists between all the levels of consciousness. It exists between birth and death, right? Or should I say life and death? I said that wrong, right? Or death and life? The in-between. The in-between place when you die and then before you come back in again. That place. And even at the spaces when your resonance really jumps, you have to traverse the void. And so the funny thing is that, as you mentioned in your story about like you found absolute stillness, most people are afraid of stillness in our culture. And when you're high enough in your resonance and you start to enter the void, it's this expansive, very deep stillness. And for some people, it's hard to come out of because it's so expansive and still and profound. So that's a wonderful thing. And as you said, that's where all form is created from. And so it's extremely powerful, because it is that field of potential in which your intention is placed and then form arises. So I think it's a really fascinating thing that you called it a place of power, because it is. And most people don't talk about the void, like they don't know that it really exists because their culture is so around doing. But the void is an extraordinary place of...
Well, I mean, it's been involved in Taoist culture for thousands of years, right up to the conception and creation of Chinese culture with one of my teachers, Yellow Emperor, who confesses his relationship as he basically rode a celestial dragon from the universe and landed on planet Earth and was magnetized to planet Earth for 18 days and nights as he downloaded through the whispers of the universe Chinese culture as we know it, which is really the seed of Taoist alchemy. So Chinese medicine is a very watered down, muted version of what alchemy really is. It's that repeatable state. I agree with you. I like people pursuing these mastered skills by being able to basically project the Shen at will and alter the now moment, but understanding that the Dantians are so important to cultivate that energy elixir and the internal alchemy, which furthermore is very much evidence of that. You need to burn that in and make that activated and realized, or it becomes a transitory psychological psychotic state of delusion. And so
I agree.
without the substance, it doesn't become realized. And so
I agree.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, what you're talking about, to me, I would call coming into your center. So centering into the 0 point of space and time. And I agree with you, because what has happened often with people is that they can have a heightened level of frequency resonance and then leave their body, or they can't come back, or they're in a different timeline, or dark realms come in. They're not strong enough internally to be able to handle those very high levels of frequency resonance. So I completely agree with you. We're saying the same thing in different ways. But I think you called it the Dantian, I call it the 0 point. But it's the same thing, right? In order to cultivate internal strength, you need to, in order to be able to be in those higher level frequencies, which is what helps you to not only experience the expansiveness of everythingness, but also to be very, very, very centered in the embodiment and in this linear present moment time, in this time-space resonance. Yeah.
The flesh and blood is the anchor, but that's part of mortality within Taoism. No plug here, but my book, Return, The Immortal's Path of Self-Realization through Taoist Alchemy, that's just another story. But with that said, that's a play-by-play understanding of the infrastructure and the most fundamental difference within all these systems, which is the big play or the big lie, is that, the grounding center point of where all the energy resides within the physical body. Someone would call it the cauldron, the fire pit. All that stuff is absolute nonsense. It's actually pure primordial energy from the mother. And it's not of any yang, which most people are deluded by. That's basically what everything is created. You would call this the entanglement, the black hole energy, which is what you could call 0 point. This is sort of more interesting as you lay it out. Someone by the name of Nassim Haramein, who's a interesting guy, has revealed this set evidence that Taoists have known for thousands of years. I teach people the internal alchemy, and one of the specific practices is witnessing the death of a star, the rising of the red phoenix, and the revealing of the black hole energy, and that comes in the center point. And with that, reveal the ruby, the red ruby, which is
Mm-hmm.
in many ancient alchemy paths referred to the philosopher's stone. So
Mm-hmm.
this is how you're accessed. That little charge you're getting up your back right now, that's it. That's the now moment. That's the expansion. You need to be able to materialize it. So
Mm-hmm.
you talk about the darkness. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you have a practice of protection, or you just realize that the now moment is unnecessary?
Yeah. Well, in my experience, I've noticed that when you hit a certain level of frequency resonance, you don't need protection anymore.
Mm.
Because you recognize the darkness is part of the one and it's just there, just like anything else. It's like, do you have to protect yourself against people who are like walking next to you? Not specifically.
Mm.
So to me, when you hit a certain level of frequency resonance, you don't need protection anymore. What you need to be vigilant about is your own mind. That's the thing that's going to kick your ass more than any darkness is your mind, your ego mind. For people who are not vibrating quite as high and they have a lot more distortion, or they have distortion patterns, which unfortunately are they're running through their lineage, which call in things like entities and so on to be in their field. That is something that people have to deal with, and which I'm sure you have encountered before. But for me, it's like you have to release those things out of people's fields and release the patterns of the things that call them in and all that sort of stuff. And it's remarkable what can happen. I mean, I just had a young woman she's actually she's probably like 15, I think. And her mother set up an appointment with her for me. And she was like not eating. She was like a very passionate dancer, but no longer interested in dance. And she just wasn't herself. And she was getting more and more isolated. And so her mother scheduled a session with me. And as soon as I tap into her, I'm like, oh, okay, well, you have a massive entity sitting in your field. So let's just get rid of that. So we released that and a whole bunch of stuff about her having like a porous, what I would call a porous spirit body. And once that happened it's kind of remarkable because she didn't really understand exactly what I was talking about because she's 15, you know what I mean? Like she's more interested in like what cool outfit she's going to wear than, what it is I'm talking to her about necessarily. But her mother wrote in actually just a day ago saying it's unbelievable the difference, right? Like just you were saying, like flesh transforms. She's like, my daughter's come back. She's like clear-eyed, back into dance, eating again, really lovely, wants to connect more with people. It's just like a totally different person. And that's because when you have something dark in you, like an entity that's, feeding on your bioenergy, you become a different person. But when you release that out of the field, then you can have a different experience. And so like that's what I mean by darkness. So things like that can happen, or you can have things that are darker, like what I would call the dead that are dark. Not all of the dead are predatory at all, but there's a small percentage of them that are, and that can come into your field, or things not of the earth that are, I guess, what some people would, I guess, call aliens that are dark. But they're all frequencies. So at some point, when you get strong enough in terms of your frequency resonance, you can hold your space, meaning you're aware of your own authority within your space. You're aware that you are co-creating your reality, and that does not need to be in your reality. So it's really, really very cool because you make this shift from being defended into being at ease and aware of your authority. And that is a very different stance. And I'm not suggesting arrogance, because it's not about being stronger, better, more tough than anyone else. It's just being aware of your authority as co-creator in your space. And so that's a beautiful thing to witness.
It's interesting. I mean, you have a similar timeline to me. Like I said, I've been clicks biologically over 32 years doing this stuff, teaching people channeling, mediumship, energy, healing, clairvoyance, all that kind of stuff. It just goes under what I consider sensory perception. You don't have to get all beaten up about it. But acquiring the sensory perception is an interesting one. 30 years ago, someone come to me with a psychological episode, psychotic potentially, and you would unravel a frequency that would be perceived from their own creation as something that is very muted and low. Furthermore, being a priest, have extensive experience in exorcisms and, feng shui and all the rest of it. It's part of what I do. So, 30 years ago, that was the thing. I can sometimes have fire sales on what someone would perceive as a low frequential state that would be coined as a dark entity. As Taoists, we don't see anything that way. It's just either yin or yang. And so you stay in a sort of a state of just now and acceptance. and there isn't an entity, or well, there was probably one, but over 30 years, maybe one that took me more than a few minutes to negotiate the outcome. But the truth is, today, that same person would have what they would consider an awakening, a psychotic episode, start channeling the Palladians and open up a YouTube channel with 100,000 followers. It's different. Now, you've observed that because recently the word consciousness is super hot, but it's also very manipulated by said scientists, physicists. That, again, is another language. I don't want to distort that. And I refer to things as a spiritual consciousness because consciousness conscious agency, which is the terminology a lot of these physicists like to use, is a very interesting psyop of separation. And they know what they're doing. It's a much deeper level of manipulation. You go in and out of conscious and unconscious process. But as you said, authority, knowing the now moment, is not manipulated in, and I mean, ground level stuff. A lot of people like to play with the beginnings of something quite remarkable, really a miracle, powerful, which would come in the form of, everyone should know something as basic as hypnosis, right? Because if you don't understand that, your form of manipulation, as I like to put it, if you're emotional, you're suggestible. And until you realize your emotions don't control you and you control your emotions, you are in that humanistic state that you speak of, where, as we both agree, the distortion becomes quite self-evident, which results in sadness, harmness. There's all kinds of variables. As you said, what you exhibited within that 15-year-old is oppression, depression, and in my business, it's called possession. And that is how you kind of realize, oh, okay, there's something that needs to be altered in that state that potentially she's not aware of, but you kind of look at it from something that could be from, rest in peace, Bob Monroe. He would coin it the loosh, which I'm not a big fan of those type of titles. I stay with the more traditional stuff, but it is a spirit. Now, how that attaches to yourself or what that means, everything has to do with how much you believe, and you have not yet created a knowing, which furthermore transmutes this sort of distortion. And if you're emotional, it's just fair game. And furthermore, you get that diluted state where people get into the linguistics, and then you get OGs like Tony Robbins that like to manipulate the mind and distort things, and that's cool. But the quantum level that you're speaking of is not where he's playing at. He's kind of poking here and poking there, and it's transitory. It's not. I'm talking about permanence. When I had my mother in a channeling class about 20 years ago, and I had about 40 students, and two of them were looking a little obscure. One will channel, the other one will observe and ask questions. And this one girl I could see was completely overrun by quite a few entities. And I started having a dialogue. Next minute, eyes roll back, she spins around, gets thrown across the room, and my mother goes, "Holy shit, this is real!" Yeah, that's right. But this is
awesome.
part of the currency that we have with the electromagnetism. And so that type of energy, as you mentioned, it becomes very vacuous, and it can really, I like to always ask someone, if you're on my doorstep, what are you here for? Well, I'm a light worker, I'm a healer, I'm a channeler, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a Reiki master, I'm a Qigong master, I'm a Chinese medicine doctor, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, how do you feel at the end of your day? I'm exhausted. Oh, okay. So you're using your life force. Now, how do you stay within this container? Because from a Taoist perspective, we call this the Jing, the constitution. And the ultimate level of realization as an immortal is having imperium over the 50 trillion cells that you possess in the human flesh, accessing the 0.07 millivolts of electric potential. How do you maintain the container, evidence of reflection of immortality, and stay as quantum? So when someone has that.
Yeah. So that's why I talked about remaining in your 0 point. So it's a practice, just like I'm sure in Taoism there's many practices. It's a practice. You have to come back here all the time. So into the center of the present moment of linear
Oops,
time. And whoops. Oh, that's
excuse
telling
me.
us. We're
Yeah,
telling us
well,
we're at
you're
time.
right on. You're
Ah,
right on the you're right on
ah,
the border there, girlfriend.
aha.
But
Okay,
you
I'll
know,
answer this question. I'll answer this question. So, yeah, so it's all about coming into the center point all the time. So one of the practices we teach is coming into the center, coming into the center, coming into the center. Because the center is not only anchoring you in this space-time dimension, it also anchors you in the embodiment, and it also gives you the access point to the infinite, all the different levels of consciousness. So it's actually being able to hold that. And as your frequency awareness or resonance rises, from my experience anyway, your awareness becomes spherical. So you are experiencing or able to be aware of, perceive, know at the level of the quantum, and also have a human experience. The thing is, the idea that we have one perspective only is kind of interesting to me. It's actually about holding multiple perspectives, but being strong enough in your center to not be pulled into multiple perspectives into insanity, right? It's to actually be aware of many things at the same time and hold it loosely enough, but be centered enough to have that experience of both anchoredness and expansion, as you said, or the quantum. So that's how you do it. So really, I mean, I know it sounds like I'm saying the same thing, but it's actually what it is, from my perspective anyway, is release your distortion patterns, raise your frequency resonance, and come into your center. If you do those things, that is how, to me, you attain all those things that you just mentioned.
yeah. I mean, that's what. I mean, the most interesting part about the Harriman discovery and the receipts of the zeros and ones and all this stuff that he's got for a formula to realize that 0.9 that is the highest point is to understand that that black hole energy, the void,
Mm-hmm.
is the eclipse of a black hole, is the
Mm-hmm.
separation between electromagnetism and unification.
Mm-hmm.
And that density, which some people would want to have a healthy conversation about, is that's that evidence, because that's the super glue that holds the entanglement together, which is
Mm-hmm.
where people realize that. I had many students, PhDs, study for UCSF, and they come back to me and they're like, Jifu, you won't believe this. Oh my goodness. I did this whole thing. I was given this assignment. I had to discover what's in the center of a nucleus of a human cell. And you wouldn't believe what I found. And I'm like, really? What?
Void.
Black hole energy. And I'm like, get
Mm-hmm.
out of here. Oh, what a coincidence. We've known about this for thousands of
Yeah,
years.
I
But
agree.
this
The
has
void is
been a
between
very,
everything.
yeah, this has been a very amazing, magical conversation of like-minded beings merging as one, unifying. I want to really thank you for coming in and taking your time out today and
Thank
sharing
you for having me.
incredible wisdom, teaching, and knowledge. I'm going to have my disciples, students, 126s, and subscribers come and check out all your social sphere and interweb under this podcast, because we got to get down with the get down. I'm a show me guy. When students experience this interaction, which is one of the reasons why I do it, is because it's visceral, it's kinesthetic, it's somatic. This is more than a conversation. This is an experience. That's
Mhm.
why it's so valuable, conversations like the ones we're having. And furthermore, is there anything you would like to close? One more last question. It's the fundamental question. What is your
Okay.
definition of spiritual consciousness?
My definition of spiritual consciousness. I would ask at what level. So to me, spiritual consciousness has to do with a vibrational level and an experience that is not of the mind. It is something that is known, felt, that you're aware of, that is infinite, that has something that is very visceral and known to you, but which is hard to express. And the reason you can't express it is because it's at a vibrational level that is higher than words, and it's higher than thought. So to me, that's what spiritual consciousness is. It has to do with awareness of that, of the infinite. Like, it's funny, we're having this conversation, which has been amazing. And as you said, we're transmitting more than words. But the thing is, language itself is so fraught with distortion, just in the words themselves or the resonance itself, because it's of the mind, of the illusion, of that being that sees through the illusion. But when you have that experience that is yours of spiritual consciousness, it is not of the mind at all, and it is known and profound and wordless. So that, to me, is what spiritual consciousness is. And you know when it happens because you can't forget it. It becomes who you are.
Well said. I've done hundreds of these podcasts, and I've never got the same answer as I should not, because that's what real spiritual consciousness is. It's your own lens of realization. Furthermore, are you still a San Franciscan?
Oh, no longer. No, we live down in, we left San Francisco a couple of years ago, and we moved to the big island of Hawaii, and now we live in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico.
Oh, there you go. Amen to that. I was going to say some of my most magical experiences on my journey of self-realization were within Chinatown in San Francisco. I was by my teacher. I went straight into an antique store. This guy had been holding my command blocks since the 1950s when he migrated over here from China. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And I mean, it's a derogative word, but the guilo, I don't know whether you're familiar with that. It's like a white spirit. What is the white spirit doing asking for this type of stuff? Well, you know, I get broken in my own. I have a love affair with Mandarin and Cantonese. And my teacher is like completely in awe because she is like, you know, sometimes it's just mind blowing the stuff that comes out of your mouth. Well, furthermore, in discovery of that, I would say that, you know, if you ever get back there, there's an antique store on Powell Street, down from the biggest Taoist temple there, which is the Jade Emperor's Palace. Always go there. They're good people, solid people, love the people. But in that Han Dynasty antique store, that guy, Henry, his name, has 3 terracotta warriors in a false wall. There you go.
Cool.
That's interesting in of itself. And Qing Dynasty, where I picked up all my command blocks and quite a few antiques that were mine in a past life. And he's just like, I didn't even know what to do with these things. Or you're coming in and asking for this stuff and it's just sitting there. That's what we would call, Karen, the quantum level awareness of knowing.
Yeah.
But
totally.
you know, I'm glad you're experiencing all these different facets going from Hawaii to Mexico.
Yeah.
I don't blend in Mexico, so that's not my origin of excitement. I'm not going to go there. That's not my thing. But
it's all right. We all have different things.
If you ever get down to America again, and I'm in the Las Vegas, Nevada area, you're always welcome to head out here. You said you take pilgrimages. I have a resort center, normally shipping about 60 people at a time. Put them up in the Nobu on the Strip. I take them out into the desert. I blow their freaking mind. And then we hop them back on a plane and they live happily ever after. So that's a center that I always offer to all my newfound friends, as if you want to bond with people or do something that is raising the consciousness, which is really the collective of all things. I mean, servitude and selflessness is the real access. Humanistic empathy is the highest point of awareness for anyone in this material. So always open to you. I'll send you my cell phone. Be aware that you're around. If you ever get to Vegas, you're always welcome. I'll let you know when this comes out. Normally it's a cycle of about 4 to 6 weeks, and it'll go out on YouTube and then over 20 podcast platforms. We get thousands of views. So that's really cool.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for you. I want to thank the universe for bringing you into my life. I want to thank the audience for sharing their time with us today. And I am your humble servant and seafood Taoist Master San Qing, and I'll see you on the next one.